If you had the Garden of Eden beneath your feet and heaven on the horizon, how hard would you fight to give it up? If you lived in a world with easy access to food, no responsibilities, and a life filled with meaning of your own making, how much effort would you put toward escaping to a paradise of bills, structure, and tax forms? The question seems absurd, but then the next question becomes, why have we done exactly that? While I'm being a bit overly positive about humanity's pre-specialized past, there's no denying that it did indeed possess something which is lost in modern civilization. To some extent, this is what the idea of the Garden of Eden is alluding to. It's the way larger, more advanced societies, in order to maintain what they've built, require us to give up so much of what we truly are. It's this hidden self, deep at our core, inextinguishable, which we all know exists. After all, if it didn't, the themes of Nicolas Roeg's Walkabout wouldn't register with us as viscerally as they do. The movie is very bare of dialogue, famously having a screenplay of only a few dozen pages. There is no speechifying, and the three main characters are too inarticulate to stumble into the themes of the film through words, at least not in any heavy-handed way. Nicolas Roeg, not only being a cinematographer, but one of the best cinematographers, directed this film with visual storytelling in mind. And even on that count, the movie moves forward as a series of half-remembered impressions. Similar to Terrence Malick's Badlands, the characters almost live a fairy tale existence, one created through their own childhood innocence. Unlike Badlands, though, which has an element of moral dubiousness, the worst things the characters in Walkabout do is hunt animals, something which they're forced to do to survive. The film starts us off by showing us civilization at its most banal and meaningless. Characters go through the rituals of civilization: school, work, home, the sterile shot composition, and the editing, which boils these moments down to a repetitive monotony, make us feel as if this world of cars and skyscrapers, instead of being signs of progress, is instead a cage, keeping our human instincts in check. The symbol of the brick wall, far from subtle, is used here both to establish the borders of our world, but also to establish the world which exists on their other side. The monotony of civilization then primes us for what comes next. The father, whose behavior is already strange, completely loses it, trying to unalive his own children, and then successfully unaliving himself. No reason is given for this action, but no reason is necessary. The movie has already set us up for understanding, at least spiritually if not factually. It was the rules, regulation, and repetition of his world which did this to him. Getting any more specific than that would only detract from the theme of the film. His two children then, left to fend for themselves in a wilderness they were never built for, walk among the animals. On one hand, they themselves are no different than these beasts of the wild. They're walking among their distant family members in the biological tree of life. But their existence among all of this is also reminiscent of the Garden of Eden, where the only two humans in existence live amongst strange animals. Being the first to recognize and name them, the first to enjoy God's creation. They play with toys on their way, reinforcing their nature as children, but also symbolizing mankind at our earliest, making playthings of our world, our lives being about play first and foremost, with work only being that which keeps us alive to play more. The toys themselves are facsimiles of things from civilization, a motif which is interesting. You see it as well both with the wardrobe of the two children, their customs, and especially the radio they carry with them, it calling to them like the ghost of a civilization that no longer exists, or maybe the ghost of a civilization that never has. They sort of stumble through this world, the direness of the situation penetrating through their young innocence. They seem doomed until they come upon a solitary tree next to a pond, one decorated by the bright colors of fruits and parakeets. This solitary tree, its fruits, and the easy joy it provides is another visual reference to the Garden of Eden. The pond then dries up, and the fruits are all devoured by beasts, something which should mean the end of our characters. But a chance meeting with an Aboriginal boy, one going through his cultural rite of passage, not only rescues them from sure death, but also forces them to endure their own rite of passage through surviving this tragedy. Right from the beginning, communication then becomes a theme, as they can't understand their new friend. Of the two, it's the brother who finds a way to communicate. And as the film progresses, the brother is quick to learn the Aboriginal language. This makes sense logically, as he's the younger of the two, with his brain being the most responsive to new and foreign knowledge. But this also ties back to the theme of childhood innocence. The brother, being younger and therefore less corrupted by society, is the quicker of the two to adapt to a more simple life. In a way, the Aboriginal child becomes as much a sibling to him as his sister, whereas his sister not only fails to learn how to communicate with their new ally, but always, to some extent, keeps some distance from him. This issue of communication, where it can be bridged and where it can't, is also biblical in origin. The Tower of Babel, where humanity as one reached for the stars, was cut short when God, in order to humble us, forced us to speak various different tongues, dividing us into countless groups of humanity, each separated by gaps in understanding. By communication being opened between these unlikely parties, it takes us to a time before the earliest experiences of humanity. Even from a secular perspective, there was a time when humanity was a new species, and our diversity in terms of culture and language was not only small but non-existent. The Tower of Babel then can be seen as a metaphor for the moment at which our cultures separated from their root culture with enough distance in space and time that they no longer know, never mind experience, a common humanity any longer. It's this separation then which causes some cultures to expand and devour others, as their rates of quote-unquote progress would vary quite a bit, just like everything else about our cultures do. Another aspect of pre-biblical fall imagery can be seen in the clothes worn by the characters, or more accurately, the lack of clothes. The legacy of shame and need for privacy, which started when Adam and Eve were first to notice their own nudity, dies here with all the other trappings of civilization. This process then reverses itself as they begin to near civilization. The closer they get, the more they begin to dress like their old selves, stepping right into the roles they left behind. This is when the movie begins to take on a sour note. First, they inhabit an abandoned home. The sight of it, the shelter it provides, and the memories it rekindles begins to prime our characters for their old lives again. Again, this phenomenon is much more prominent in the sister's case, as she's older and more used to the amenities and culture of her own civilization than her brother is. Though even in her brother's case, he shows signs of acclimating himself to his old ways, especially when he pockets the money he finds, signaling that he still holds material values. The way the sister then begins to treat the Aboriginal friend, almost addressing him as if he's a servant, goes to show the divide which will arise between them soon. This dynamic becomes heartbreaking, as his attraction to her begins to become more clear here. His traditional courting process, which is beautiful in its own right, becomes disturbing for our two Western characters, who not only have trouble processing what they're seeing, but what little the sister understands begins to unsettle her, as she has no way of knowing what form this attraction will truly take. This goes back to the idea of Babel. We're not only separated by our languages, but also by our cultures. What is perfectly normal and even admirable behavior in one culture becomes alien and upsetting to another. In either case, the rejection becomes too much to bear. On top of it, the Aboriginal boy has witnessed the future of hunting using technology when white hunters come and sweep up an entire region of all its animal life in just minutes. What is a brave new world for some people is an apocalypse for others, as he sees the measure of his own manhood becoming irrelevant in this moment. The very yardstick which is used to measure worth in his culture is broken over the knee of modernity, leaving him with nothing, at least nothing that's truly his. The unaliving of the boy at the end mirrors the unaliving of the father at the beginning. In both cases, it's the loss of hope which spurs it on. As the brother and sister come back into civilization, they're met with hostility. They don't take this as a sign that they're making the wrong decision by going back, not even for a moment. Again, the film mirrors itself here, where the sister, now grown up and married, lives a life identical to her mother's. When her husband comes home, informing her of his successes in modern, sterile office politics, she can't help but imagine the paradise she once experienced, the paradise she left of her own accord. It wasn't a paradise because it was without flaw, nor is it say that modern society doesn't have its clear and obvious advantages. It was a paradise because for every boon it lacked in quantity, it made up for it by a boon in quality. It was a life of meaning, standing firm in its final years, against a life of increasingly accumulating stuff. In the end, her reminiscences aren't just her own. They belong to all of us. We all have those moments, however brief, when we think on all we, as a species, have left behind.